to answer certain questions, we need to think about the big picture, what it all means. And to really evaluate those kinds of questions, the kind of unicity that brings value to life, that brings value to this world, we sometimes need to really look at the very big picture. Astronomy can sometimes give us some perspective. How unique is this world? To give you a sense of it, imagine that you had a little bit of talcum powder in your hand, and that you're looking at it and you're seeing the very smallest grain. You pick one, and you paint it red. And we're going to now do one of those little contests where you're like, there's a jar and you're trying to figure out how many marbles are in the jar. So we're going to basically look at different size piles and try to figure out just how unique is this world. So imagine this entire room was filled with talcum powder, and we had one little grain of red in that, one little grain, compared to an entire room, this entire space, solid full. Is that how unique life on Earth is? Nope. It's bigger than that. Imagine you're looking at a mountain, an enormous mountain. You're standing at the base and you're looking way up and you're basically saying there's this huge, huge, huge pile. And only one single grain represents this planet, the life that we know. Amongst all of that, is that how unique life on Earth is? Nope. It's even bigger. Imagine you're standing at the top of the mountain, you're looking out over this ocean of mountains. You're up in an aircraft, you're looking out over the entire Earth. And this entire Earth, the land, the seas, everything we know, the entire planet taken as one huge, enormous ball of talcum powder floating in space with one little red grain buried somewhere in the middle of that. What is the chance that if you were to just pick up one single grain, that it would be the red one? Just think of how improbable that is. We are one world out of 700 billion stars. To really appreciate what it means for the unicity of life on Earth, so far as we know, this is it, right? The life that we experience on this planet, the thing we take for granted every single day of our lives, is so astoundingly miraculous that even to use the word miracle doesn't come anywhere close to how incredibly unique this world is, how incredibly special life is. Consider for a moment that the most miraculous thing you could possibly imagine, the most amazing synchronistic experience, multiply that by 100 and imagine that happening everywhere in the world simultaneously, like so much so that the miraculous becomes ordinary. And then what in that context would be miraculous? Well, now we're just beginning to get there. We would need to do that 3 or 4 more times to get to the level of improbability that life is on this planet. Okay? And I'm only saying this because I'm trying to give you a real sense as to just how important it is, just how meaningful our lives are, just how special this world is compared to an entire universe that, for all that we know, may be empty. So, in that particular sense, I invite you to understand, I invite you to think about your lives as being more special in the greater scheme of things than you may have appreciated. That in a sense that we are in a position of having an influence over our evolution, being able to make choices that define the future of this planet. We have, through genetic evolution and manipulation of technology, the capacity to create machines that may someday be even more Machiavellian than ourselves. It only takes one, right? And that in effect, there are these risks that we have, in a sense, gotten into because of business or because of the way in which we organize ourselves in the world, the ways that we think about community and so on, that we completely overlook. That there is, in a sense, a greater scheme that we need to, in a sense, answer back to really appreciate just how incredible and unique, just how special it is that the choices that we make need to, in a sense, respond to the greater scheme of just how special this is. We think of ourselves as a species, a species that has in effect taken over the entire planet, and that we are in a position to be making choices about ecosystems and what happens with resources and things like that. And then in effect, we think about it in terms of our own lives. But we are, even in comparison to other animals, so much more similar to them than we are different from a rock, right? The real comparison is an absolute scale, not a relative one. So I invite you to appreciate the specialness of just how unique this world is. We go to beautiful places and then we come back and we say, well, geez, I'm living in an ordinary town and so on and so forth. There's no such place on this entire planet that is ordinary when you think of all of those other places you could be in the universe to actually be here in this paradise. So when we're thinking about risk and existential risk and our role and our choices that we make, we have to consider that the way in which our minds work to some extent is like a fish in water. We don't perceive the biases. We don't perceive the ways in which our choices actually are influenced by our biology. We need, in a sense, a deeper set of tools to make the kinds of choices that govern things like if we are going to be in possession of evolution, if we are, in a sense, going to be influencing the course of the future of this planet, appropriate use of technology, appropriate use of how we relate to one another, appropriate use of power. We need a deeper level of tools. We need a deeper level of decision-making. Science and technology, although they can show us how something can be done, they do not give us the tools to know what should be done. There's no ought in science or technology. There's no particular reason why we should either build something or not build something. They'll tell us how, but they don't say anything about what it means. What is the connection that creates? How does that make life more meaningful or not? Our economic systems, in effect, at this particular point, have become kind of a prison. The more in which we are looking at creating value or having things for a purpose, we have lost the message, the idea that meaningfulness is deeper than value or purpose. That the thing that is ultimately the case is that life is inherently meaningful. I sometimes get asked, what is the meaning of life? And I can only reply, there's no real difference. That every life is meaningful, and everything that is meaningful is alive. And that any notion of value or purpose has to emerge from that. That we can't have value or purpose without already having some sort of connection, some sort of in-betweenness. Because none of us owns the English language. None of us owns any particular word. We basically share the sense of meaningfulness, and the capacity to communicate is, in effect, a shared thing. It is an in-betweenness. It is an interpersonal aspect. So when we're thinking about how do we make good choices, how do we enter into the kind of stewardship that recognizes the true meaningfulness, the true value of life on this earth, how do we begin to think about those choices in an effective way? In a way that, in a sense, is responding to the sheer meaningfulness, the sheer depth of what is. When I was 16, I made a commitment. My commitment was that I was going to encounter nature in a completely non-projecting way, I'm going to accept it as it is. I'm going to encounter it without trying to have it translate itself into my language, to try to codify it in any specific mathematics or in any particular modality, that I, in a sense, would be naked in front of it, that I would go 100% of the distance to learn what was and is. And out of that came this constellation of ideas, this constellation of thoughts, these experiences that led me to certain insights. And while it might take a while to describe what those insights are, and it's not really relevant at this very moment, those insights led to a series of ideas about ethics. It was actually unexpected for me. I wasn't really thinking that I would end up with a theory of ethics. It kind of happened by accident. But I'm beginning to see that that's probably the most important thing, the most useful thing that could possibly have happened. If we're going to make good choices as a species, we need a deeper set of tools. We need a kind of philosophy of choice. We're taught in schools that philosophy is mostly useless. I'll tell you, as a business person, philosophy is like the keystone that made it possible for business to actually work. Why are we even in business? Why are we even doing any of the things that we do? Well, at some level or another, it's going to come back to the notion of meaningfulness. What matters to you? What matters in this situation? What matters in life itself? Because at the end of the day, that's all there is. Out of this core came two ideas about ethics. One of them is a symmetry ethics. Most of you are for sure familiar with this. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto yourself. The notion of equality, the notion of fairness. All of those are symmetry concepts. The piece that seemed to be missing was the notion of continuity ethics, the kind of thing that governs continuums of flow, cycles that actually connect back to themselves. The notion of continuity and, in a sense, the kind of connectedness, the flow that occurs between people having a certain smoothness, a consistent rate of change, turns out to be just as important to theory of ethics as anything else that I can think of. It balances the symmetry ethics. And these may be very abstract ideas, but it turns out that one layer past that comes some fairly concrete things. When we want to recognize what is a good choice, to some extent we have to have an idea of what goodness means in that context. What does it mean to make a good choice? What is a way in which we become the people, become the person that can recognize when we have made a good choice? How would we know? What does it mean to do that? It's a choice that in effect is omniconsiderate. It not only manifests in the moment, but it opens the door for potentials in the future. It is in a sense a choice which considers not just what you think, but also what you feel in your heart. And not just your heart, but the heart of the person that you're talking to. The heart of the community that you're in. The deep meaning of what it is to be alive. And to be able to respond from that place, that deep place of loving what is, loving life itself in the most profound way possible, including not just yourself and your community, but the entire planet in which we live. Now that is a good choice. Wouldn't it be good news if it was always possible to make an omniconsiderate choice, to make a win-win choice? I'm here to tell you, it is. There is no circumstance, there is no such thing as a circumstance that is constructed, that is actually in life. I should distinguish between constructed circumstances where somebody's creating some hypothesis. You can always create a hypothesis that assumes the conclusion is trying to reach. If you're constructing an ethical hypothesis, yeah, there's lots of impossible situations. But if you're talking about actual life, being here now and making choices as a person in the moment, it's always possible to make a win-win choice. Categorically, always possible. Point blank, period. That's a pretty strong statement. I'm willing to back it up. The next thing that is actually surprising, that's kind of important, is that these choices, these win-win choices, let's say you were in a situation and you made a win-win choice, you actually figured out a way to make an omniconsiderate choice. It was worth the time, it's always worth the time to search for the win-win choice, right? It's always worth it because we know it exists. In each situation, to the best of our capacity, we search for the win-win choice. But let's say that the effort, the extreme process that we may need to go through to find what that choice is doesn't make it any easier to make the next win-win choice in the situation that immediately subsequently follows, right? That would be kind of a bummer. But it turns out, again, derived from a theory of ethics, which itself is derived from a foundation that is even deeper than physics, because it would have to be. Because physics can't tell you what to do, so you need to sense a deeper theory. You need something that comes out of measurement itself, something that comes out of the literal foundations of what it means to do science or mathematics at all. That out of that rich context, that first-person direct encounter context, it's possible to know that the choices that are win-win are actually contiguous with one another. that in a hyperspace of all possible choices, that there is in effect a sequence, that the capacity to make a win-win choice makes it actually easier to make the subsequent win-win choice in the situation that immediately follows. Many of you have probably been told that if you tell the truth, it gets easier to continue telling the truth. That, if you lie, you have to start building up more and more hypotheses to sort of protect that, and that if you just tell the truth in the first place, then what effectively happens is that it just flows. So the second idea, beyond just that it's always possible to make a win-win choice, is that these notions of win-win choice are actually contiguous with one another, that it makes it easier to make the win-win choice. Once you get to the point that you're synchronized with that, life flows in an omniconsiderate way. That's really, really good news, because there's no prior reason for us to assume that that would be the case. The third thing, which is pretty important to know as far as making effective choices, individually, as community, as a world, given the huge development of exponential technology. We have devices that at this particular point that I have become aware could end all life on this planet in a millisecond. That even there are things happening in the world that there is a very small risk that I wouldn't even finish this sentence and all this would disappear. I'm not here to go into those particular topics. I'm actually here to talk about the good things, the good possibilities. So we know that we can make win-win choices. We know that we have the capacity to, once we've made win-win choices, that it will continue to do so. The third thing that's important to know is that the degree to which it seems that we cannot make a win-win choice in any given situation is proportional to the degree to which we need to upgrade our capacity to imagine. In other words, that in a hyperspace of all possible choices we can make, that there is a gradient that allows us to essentially seek the direction, whatever it is that you can imagine, which is the closest to omniconsiderate, the closest to a true win-win choice, is the vector direction that you need to keep going in to converge on the path of right action. That's actually also very fortunate, because it means that we now have not only a capacity to know that it's worth searching for a win-win choice, and that it's viable to do so, and to continue to do so. It is also viable to use your current position to navigate to the position at which the path of right action for you as an individual in your capacity to make choice, to, in a sense, be a representative of consciousness in this entire universe. Now that's pretty special. That's actually as profound a good news as it's possible to have, which is why I chose that as this particular topic, although there are thousands of other things that we could talk about that would be fun and amusing and worthwhile. I invite you to treat your choice, your capacity to choose, as sacred. In the same way that I would describe this world as being critically sacred. The notion of sacred is a deepening of the notion of value, a deepening of the notion of purpose, a deepening of the notion of meaningfulness. How far down can we go with that? How deep and rich can it become? That's what I invite you into, to think about your choice as connected to that deep essence of what is. And insofar as you honor that in yourself, life will become richer, more alive, people become healthier and more integrated, communities become more fun and healthier, and the thriving of this world becomes something which is absolute. Love is that which enables choice. Love is always stronger than fear. Always choose on the basis of love. Namaste.